of the most controversial issues about office life, or at least one of the most complained about, is noise. It may not be the first thing that springs to mind when we talk about comfort, but acoustic comfort is essential when it comes to offering people a great experience of work. Joining me to explore this issue is Dr. Nigel Oseland, one of the world's leading authorities on the subject. Nigel is an environmental psychologist, workplace strategist, change manager, researcher, international speaker, lecturer, and published author with 11 years of research and 23 years of consulting experience. Is that up to date?
25 now, I think.
All right, there you go. Time flies. He has written and contributed to a number of books on related subjects, drawing on subjects such as psychology and anthropology to illuminate our relationship with our surroundings and our fellow apes. His most recent is The Science of People and Office Design, co-edited with Sally Augustin, who many people will know, which looks at what research says about numerous facets of the office and the way we behave within it. Fair enough?
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent. Um, so why do you think acoustics is, I suppose, arguably the most talked about issue when people complain about office life? I mean, I think the only thing that compares to it in any way is temperature, but I think
Yeah, yeah. In terms of the environmental conditions, the three biggest complaints are temperature, indoor air quality, and noise or acoustics. And I think part of the issue is with noise in particular. It's partly to do with the design of the space, the workplace, and we can come on to that. But I think fundamentally, noise is a psychoacoustic issue. And what I mean by that is it's not just about the physical environment and sound levels, it's about how we interpret sound and we determine whether that sound is unwanted, i.e., a noise. But of course, the issue you have in a particular large open space is that there's a group of individuals all working and possibly doing different activities, which require different levels of concentration and therefore maybe different sound levels. And some individuals will be able to cope with higher sound noise, whereas other individuals, and I'm thinking like introverts or highly conscientious people, that they might struggle with screening out that noise around them. And it's not the reason I say noise is unwanted sound is because it's about the interpretation of that sound as well. So out there in the real world, the physical world, you've got airwaves. Basically, they hit the eardrum. There's a physiological response to that. We convert that into sound. Sound only exists in our head. And then this next phase is cognition kicks in, and then there's an interpretation of that sound. So it's affected by things like what we're doing, our personality, all sorts of personal factors. And I think that's fundamentally why it's really difficult to resolve noise in large open areas, because it's full of individuals all doing different things with different backgrounds and personality types. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you've talked as well before about how your relationships with your colleagues, for example, can influence how you respond to the noise they generate.
Yeah, yeah,
Is that correct?
absolutely. Yeah, I'd say part of that noise equation is the distractions from colleagues. Well, is it a distraction or is it an interaction? It could be the same message, but depending on what you're doing, that colleague asking you for your advice on something could be seen as a distraction. So, oh, actually, this is a useful interaction because I'm kind of working on that as well. And yeah, if you're in small areas with smaller teams where you're all kind of working on the same project and you're all working together and it's a bit entrepreneurial and you're all motivated to do the same thing, obviously you're going to be more tolerant of the people around you or who are basically going to be talking about things that are of interest to you as well, and therefore it's less of a distraction and more of a useful kind of background kind of thing to have. But as I say, it still comes down to the individual. Like some of them will be able to screen and others won't, and if you're trying to do that, get that deliverable out, that piece of maths or that kind of analysis, and you just want to finish it, and you've got several spreadsheets open, and you're making all those connections. That kind of speech interference is just going to kill that focus and concentration. So therefore, noise is an issue.
So do people associate that now with the return to the office? Is that
Yeah,
something that's been brought into focus over the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think again, there's little bits of research to support it, but a lot of it's anecdotal, or it's when I've been interviewing or conducting workshops, and it's certainly come up this idea that in the home environment, depending on your home environment, but say you have the luxury of a private space, a home office, whatever, or you're working in the shed, the cabin at the bottom of your garden, like I do, you have a lot of control over sound and noise. You know, my biggest disturbance here is the birds singing, but isn't that a lovely little bit of background sound to have? So, so people are able to, they've got more control over the sound and also the distractions, the interruptions in their home. So then when they come into the office, there's like almost a higher expectation. They've got used to this level of control and controlling the distractions. So I think,
Yeah,
yes, I think you're right to some extent. Then people come in, it's like, oh, but if I go in, I'm going to be distracted, and I'm going to, I'm sitting next to Fred, who was always on his phone, and Muriel is always asking me about what I thought of EastEnders and all this kind of thing. And I'm not saying you don't need to do that, because I think the social aspect of the workplace is really important. But I think there's a space to do that. You take that kind of conversation in another place. We create spaces where people can have those interactions and noisier activities away from the main desk area, particularly if people in the main desk zone are there to focus and concentrate rather
yeah.
than interact and chat and collaborate and so on.
Conversely, I remember during lockdown as well, you could go onto Spotify and you could find tracks on there that
Yeah,
mimicked um, the background noise of an office.
yeah, or a cafe. That was the other one, wasn't it?
Yeah, 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 and that's
Yeah,
actually properly noisy, isn't it? A cafe. So
yeah. But that's again a funny thing about sound, isn't it? Is that and this goes back. You mentioned my book and anthropology and stuff, and as from an evolutionary point of view, where we evolved to survive and thrive on the African savannah, and the evolutionary psychologists are saying the brain still hasn't evolved. We're still in that, yeah, we're still geared, wired up to think like that. So in the natural world, complete quiet, complete silence is indicates danger. It means there's a predator or a fire or a storm or something happening when there's no bird song or whatever. And so I think that's an aspect of wanting a little bit of background noise. And then there's the whole field around masking, sound masking. So it's useful to have a little hum of background noise. Some we used to do it through white noise and air conditioning noise and all the rest of it. Some organisations are toying with whether it can be more natural soundscapes, and I'm not convinced by that. I think soundscapes are great in areas for relaxation because they're re-energizing and so on. But yeah, we need a little bit of a background hum. And yeah, many years ago, I was working on a large corporate office, and we in hindsight, we made a mistake, but we didn't think we did at the time. What we did is we had an office, and on the office floors, we did have breakout spaces, social areas. But we in the atrium, we provided some fantastic facilities, lovely barista coffee, and all the rest of it. And what we found is that everyone was using that facility so much for interactions that the actual floors, the main office floors, were so silent that if a phone rang and on the other side of the floor, it was distracting. Literally you could hear a pen drop. We've all heard that phrase. So when it's really, really quiet, weirdly, you kind of get more distraction. So we've got to have a little bit of a background hum, but it needs to be a hum rather than distinguishable speech. Because if it's distinguishable speech, then we tune into it and then we get distracted again.
yeah, well, I know I actually listened to one of those tracks that I mentioned, and and it was you could tell it was English, but they may as well have been saying rhubarb, rhubarb as anything else. You couldn't
Yeah,
make anything out,
so
and
it
it
sounds
wasn't
like
as
it's nice. I remember again, you can have a private conversation in a cafeteria, and yet you people were worried about having a private conversation in a breakout space because there's a certain amount of anonymity in the cafeteria, but also people aren't tuning in; they're not necessarily listening, and you have got that little bit of background hum as well. So it's kind of weird, isn't it? How a relatively noisy environment can actually be, be more useful than one that's more silent. Although And I know we're talking about workplace, but I have to say, when it comes to things like restaurants, it just winds me up that the fact that restaurants are so loud because they want that buzzy, stimulating feel to them. But when I go to a restaurant, it's normally because I want to have a tete-a-tete, I want to have a little chat or whatever. And I just, getting on in age as well. Myself, Mark, the high frequency range is going. So all of a sudden, we can't quite tune into to high frequency women's voices. So you're out there with your partner, and you're struggling to hear them. So it's like, please, can we sort out restaurants and workplace canteens and all the rest of it? Because right now they're designed without any thought whatsoever for acoustics, as far as I can see.
All right, okay. Because what is the impact on people when there are poor acoustics in an environment?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, it's distracting, so you can lose your place. And do you remember the old Marco and De Lister, was it, or DeMarco and Lister? And they talk about the 15 minutes to get in a state of flow. So again, this is where we're really seeing it. If you introverts, analysts, so certain jobs are attracted to certain personalities are attracted to certain jobs. So analysts, people who are doing finance, lawyers, and so on, they tend to be highly introverted and all the rest of it. So what you find is, first and foremost, you're getting distracted, and that can be the either due to personality and nature of the job. So you're distracted, so you lose your sense. So then there's a frustration around that, isn't there? Because I've got to kind of go back and rethink things and get back into that state of flow. But there's more serious effects. I mean, long term, it can lead to stress. It can have ill health issues, and it that obviously the louder sounds, normally outside the office, are the ones that have more impact on health and well-being. But even in the office, our research certainly seems to indicate that the fact that you're constantly distracted and disturbed, it just increases the stress levels. You're not getting your work done, and ultimately that'll have a health effect as well.
It's interesting. Uh, because people think about distractions most obviously when it comes to this, but there are obviously potential physiological impacts from having poor acoustic surroundings.
Yeah, but I say that tends to be in more industrial environments or outside of the workplace. I mean, the noise levels within the office space, let's say, should, okay, industrial's workplace, isn't it? But the noise within the office environment should never get to those levels. But back to my restaurant story, just like we banned smoking in restaurants, and I think from memory that was partly because of the impact on the staff. I,
Yeah.
I I really think there should be legislation around sound levels in things like restaurants and other workplaces, which there already are, because I, I can't see how it's not affecting them. Staff working in not just restaurants but in nightclubs and things like that. But as I say, those kind of hard physiological effects come from the much higher sounds, which we shouldn't be exposed to in the office.
There's a multiplier effect sometimes, isn't there? I notice when I'm in, let's say, in a pub or a restaurant, if somebody's talking particularly loudly or there's loud music in there, people raise the volume, don't they? And it kind of then tends
Yeah,
to
the
escalate.
yeah, the Lombard effect, it's called, where you're absolutely right, where we raise our voices to be heard, but if we're all doing that, it, then the noise only gets more. And it's strange, isn't it? Yeah. So we're introducing music into an environment, and people want to be heard, so then they speak even louder, which does seem a bit strange.
Well, not in the pubs I go in, I have to say.
Yeah.
Probably a bit like yourself. I tend to go for things where as old farts can sit around and have a proper conversation without
Well,
competing with the soundtrack.
I blogged on what we can learn in workplace design from pub design many years ago, because at the time it was, you'd go to a pub and you could go to a little nook and cranny and have a bit of privacy and even do a bit of work there, or you'd sit at the bar and you'd chat and so on. And I like the fact that pubs were broken up into distinct spaces where some of them were clearly about more about the interaction, the social, and others were more about hiding yourself and having a bit of privacy. And that kind of design we apply to the office. We back to office design, and one aspect is that we can introduce different types of space with an expectation that there are different sound levels, different aspects of noise in those spaces. So, for example, I'm a big fan of introducing quiet zones into offices now, especially post-COVID, back to what you said about people getting used to working without distractions. So the quiet zones in offices, I am a fan of, and I know it's a little bit controversial, but an area where there's no phones are on silent, and it's a kind of a library style zone. And the way you make it work even better is you kind of design it almost to mimic a library. So you'll have you can use book shelving, for example. And by the way, books are great absorbers of sound. But you can use bookshelves to create semi-partitioning and a bit of absorption. And then the desks themselves, you might have higher screens, so more like a chorale style library chorale. Use a bit of subdued lighting and so on. And then the idea is that people go into that space and they immediately go, "Oh, okay, this is a quiet space." This goes back to Barker's behavioural settings, where when we go into a space, and he uses libraries and churches as the example, when we go into spaces, we know how to behave in those spaces based on our experience and expectations of those spaces. So we can kind of mimic libraries to create quiet zones. And again, I'm working with a company right now, and there's a proportion of their staff who really love those quiet zones. They haven't got space at home because they've got dependents or they're in a flat share or whatever. But the nature, their personality, and actually there's quite a few neurodiverse people in that respect as well. When they come in the office, they want peace and quiet. They want to do focused work, and they want to work without distraction. If they want interaction, they get up from that zone and they go to one of the social spaces, the breakout spaces or whatever, and say, "Hey, I'm available for a chat." But when I'm in that zone, don't come near me. But people used to mimic it in the open plan, didn't they, when they still do, by wearing headphones. There's not necessarily anything on the headphones. It's basically the headphones are just a sign to say, "Leave me alone."
Yeah. Well, I've seen other ways of getting that across. I mean, one of them is there was an office furniture manufacturer that created a desk with a traffic light thing on the
Yeah,
screens. I
yeah,
don't know if
yeah.
you saw this. So if it's red, they want you to leave them alone. But also there are things like I mean, I don't know how much of these things are widespread or just what I've heard. It's like you can access the recordings of Zoom meetings on YouTube, for example. So if you wanted somebody to leave you alone, you could just put that on your screen, and they
Oh,
would assume you're in a meeting.
that's a brilliant
You
idea.
know,
But
I
the fact that
don't.
we have to do that's quite bad, isn't it? I mean, and again, part of the solutioning for good design for acoustics, we can do so much with design, and we've talked about different spaces and also about adding absorption, but a lot of it's behavioral as well, because a lot of what people class as noise is those distractions and so on. So you can start to create some behavioral codes, some principles or whatever, etiquette, I guess is a better word, where to make so that people know how to behave in those open plan environments. And zoning is really important as well. The number of offices I go to where you've got people trying to focus and concentrate located next to people who are on calls doing sales or whatever, it's ridiculous. So there's just some, it's weird, noise is the biggest problem. Yet when you go into most offices, you can see straight away, weirdly it's noise, but you can see straight away why it's not working. That's ridiculous that we're doing that. And it's a lot of companies do it, and I think it's partly this thing about designing with the eyes. It's partly about bringing acousticians in late into the design process, all sorts. But yeah, my point is that we can do so much with design, but actually there's a behavioural element as well that can be resolved. I remember one of my first major fit out jobs when I was working with an architect's practice, and I did the post occupancy evaluation, and noise was one of the issues. And uh, so what I found is that there were two aspects to that noise. One is that the desk screens were too low, Quite a lot of organisations don't even have desk screens anymore. You know, the partitions, screens between the desks. So you're talking directly at someone, and there's no barrier to stop your voice transferring to them, and they might be on a Teams call, and you might be on a Teams call. And so that was the first thing. It's okay, yeah, the screens were, in hindsight, the screens were probably low, but that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem was that, and this is in the days when we had phones on the desks. Do you remember that? Having desks,
Yeah.
and what they'd given everyone a phone on their desk, and they'd given them one of those spider phones, a hands-free phone.
Okay.
So people were doing hands-free calls in the middle of the open plan because they'd been given hands-free phones, and they assumed that's what. And then I asked IT, why did you give everyone hands-free phones in an open plan environment? And they said, well, they were the same price as the phones without hands-free, so we thought it was a kind of free upgrade. And then of course the remedy to that was that we had to do some behavioral work and remind people how distracting that was, and also remind them that we'd provided loads of spaces around the perimeter where they could just go and drop in and have uh, um, those calls, those what have been teleconference calls in those days rather than video conference. So you know, there's some simple design stuff, but also there's a lot of behavioral stuff.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I remember one fit out company telling me was like lighting design even has an effect on acoustics as well, because if you've got harsh downlights,
Mm.
it can create shadows across people's mouths. I don't know if you ever come across this.
No.
So one of the things when we're talking to people is we're watching their mouths often as well, so
Yeah.
we understand that what they're saying. And the point was, if you can't see somebody's mouth or you can't
Mm.
make it out clearly, actually you might not be able to hear them as well. I don't know if that's a major thing, but it's just like a little sort of
Mm.
anecdote about how things you don't consider, like a bit like your phones, then
Yeah.
have unexpected consequences.
Yeah, it might. It might. I mean, I don't think we all lip read as such, do we? But I think certainly, again, when you get older and you're losing those high frequencies, you do look at people's. This is non-verbal communication. You do look at people's faces and their expressions, and even if you can't quite hear them, you're almost interpreting what they're saying. So there might be elements of that.
Yeah, but it's a complex subject, isn't it? It's like we were talking before we started recording about the issue of the surfaces that you have in an office
Yeah,
can
yeah,
affect that. It's not just the screens. I mean, there's obviously been a lot more sort of acoustic pods have been sold over the last 5 years than ever in
yeah,
history. I think
yeah.
whatever you make of
Well,
those.
yeah, I am a fan of the pods because it's a simple furniture solution. You know, you're not having to build partitions and all the rest of it. And they do provide, I think, because most of them have really good acoustics, and they do provide spaces where you can do those quick Teams calls or private calls, confidential calls. And I say one of the design principles is you design you designing spaces where noisy activities can take place outside of the main work area. So I'm a fan of those introducing those kind of solutions, and again, there's a bit of etiquette around it because what you don't want is people sat in there for 3 or 4 hours. But to be honest, most of them don't have any air conditioning, so people can only stand them for about half hour anyway. So it works either rightly or wrongly. It works. But yeah, but then it is about in terms of going back to the solutions, and when I did the work with Paige Hodsman at Ecophon, and we talked about the different layers. So the first layer is that basically that fundamental acoustic layer, which is getting the absorption right. So that's making sure that there is absorption in the offices. We mentioned desk screens, but to be honest, a lot of them don't have that good absorption property. But so they don't absorb, but at least they can reflect sound. But yeah, certainly the use of carpet. I mean, it's weird, isn't it, that in high traffic areas we take away the carpet because we don't want to clean it. So in high traffic areas, then you get the noise, the clippity clopping of feet and so on. So there's an introduction of carpet. Wall panels are really good. We've seen more people introducing wall panels, and the beauty of wall panels these days is that you can put they can have colors, they can have images. So I quite like having biophilic images on the wall panels and so on. And then you get to the ceiling, of course, and again in the older days we would have had acoustic ceiling panels and an acoustic ceiling tile throughout. these days, and I think it's one of the main causes of disturbance in offices, is we strip it all out. There's a trend for exposed ceiling slabs, and that leads to a lot of reverberation and noise bouncing off the ceilings. So if you are going to have an exposed ceiling slab, and I know that they look trendy, they look cool. Everyone loves a kind of loft warehouse industrial look, but if you're going to do that, you need to at least add in some floating ceiling tiles, solo panels, and so on. And these days they can be different shapes as well. You can have different forms, different colors, so you can almost make them a artistic feature as well. But you certainly need some absorption at the ceiling level as well. Otherwise, that sound is just going to carry everywhere. So you've got to get rid of the kind of bouncing of the sound. This is again slightly different to noise because that's unwanted sound. But you want to get rid of the bouncing sound. And then, as I said, the next zone is about those activities and making sure that the people doing noisy activities are in one area and people doing quiet activities in the other. And of course, you do get mixtures, and how you manage that is more of a behavioural thing. And then we talk about personality as well, because of the fact that we said right at the start that some personality types are more susceptible to noise disturbance than others. So actually, can you start organising people by their activities and their personality and so on? But fortunately for us, as I said, certain jobs attract certain personalities, so you can kind of combine those. So it is quite complicated to do it. Oh, and as I said, really important as well is to create those spaces where people can go and be noisy when they want to, and create spaces where people can be super quiet and or have quiet zones when they need them as well.
In that way, I suppose the design is a signifier about the expected behaviour. But the point you were making with churches and libraries,
Yeah.
if you have a particular environment, people will respond to it in a way that you hope fits with what you're trying to achieve with the design.
Yeah. You can work it the other way, can't you? You can create stimulated, buzzy, noisy environments using color and lighting and so on, and people walk into that space. Oh, this is clearly a collaboration. The design of the furniture is the furniture designed for solo walkers, or is it more designed, i.e., without screens, for interaction and collaboration? And again, just to throw a little bit of psychology and to my favorite phrases from psychology, sociopetal and sociofugal space. And basically, I think that was Robert Sommer and maybe Osmond. Basically, sociofugal is space that discourages interaction, and sociopetal is space that encourages interaction. And you can use design to do that.
Okay, that's brilliant. I think we're drawing to a close now. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think I've covered the basics. Noise is unwanted sound, and the way we create or help at least alleviate the issues with noise is partly through behaviours and encouraging the right behaviours, but also providing spaces to support both quiet work and interactive work, and also recognising that individuals respond to noise differently.
So, like everything, it's complicated.
It's complicated, but it's doable. I mean, the problem is at the moment is we don't even bother. We ignore it until it's a problem. Can we please sort this out during the design process and not as an afterthought when it's gone wrong?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nigel.
Cheers, Mark.
Thanks.